My daughter left me at a nursing home with a note that read, "This is where you belong," and the fluorescent lights hummed like a verdict. 3 months later, I unlocked the administrator's office with my own key and hung that note in a frame above the desk. People say they don't believe it when they meet me in the lobby, the woman who arrived as cargo and stayed as the boss. They don't believe who begged the receptionist for an appointment that day either. Ashley did, red-eyed and shaking, the same girl I once coached through spelling bees and heartbreaks. Before I tell you why she came back and how I turned that note into my compass, let me rewind to where our cracks began. I'm Margaret Collins, 66, retired school librarian from a quiet cul-de-sac outside Columbus, Ohio. I raised Ashley on boxed mac and cheese, Saturday morning soccer, and the smell of cinnamon rolls on snow days. We clipped Target coupons together and sang along to Bonnie Raitt on road trips to the state fair. After her father, Tom, died 2 summers ago, I made casseroles for a month and learned to sleep without his snore. Ashley became the spreadsheet in our family, the one who double-checked my Medicare forms and scolded me for leaving the porch light on. I mistook her control for care because that's how mothers survive, translating criticism into concern. My mornings were simple. Mr. Coffee drip on the kitchen counter, oatmeal with brown sugar, the Today Show murmuring while I watered the spider plant. On Wednesdays, I baked banana bread for the church potluck and wrapped a loaf for Ashley to take to her office downtown. I babysat my grandson, Oliver, letting him build Lego cities while I ironed Ashley's blouses and stitched a loose button back on her blazer. When I mentioned renewing my garden plot or taking a watercolor class at the community center, she'd purse her lips and tap her Apple Watch. She started leaving glossy brochures on my mail pile. Senior Living Simplified, Safety First for Aging Parents, as if they were catalogs for shoes. I slid them into the recycling with the pizza coupons, telling myself she was just worried, not plotting my relocation. The day it happened, she said we were going to brunch in German Village, and I grabbed my cardigan and a tin of oatmeal raisin cookies I'd baked for her team. Instead, she took the exit by the hospital, parked outside Maple Grove Care Center, and said she wanted me to tour a place with better support, while my hip healed. Inside, the air smelled like lemon disinfectant and powdered mashed potatoes, and somewhere down the hall, someone was calling bingo numbers. While I read a bulletin about a 4th of July barbecue, an intake nurse asked for my social security card, and Ashley slid my wallet across the counter like she'd rehearsed it. She kissed my cheek, pressed a folded note into my palm, whispered, "Mom, this is where you belong now," and left before the elevator doors finished closing. By dinner, I had a paper wristband, a tray of meatloaf and lime jello, and a view of the parking lot where the spot she'd taken stayed painfully empty. This is the story of how the woman I lived to protect decided a locked ward and a sticky tray table were my fate, and how I made that fate blink first. If you've ever been told to shrink, to accept the corner chair while someone else writes your ending, you're going to want to hear what happened next. Hit subscribe and tap the little bell, because what I found behind those beige doors, friends, secrets, and leverage, turned that note into a lift, not a cage. Stay with me as I tell you how a retired librarian became the most inconvenient resident Maple Grove ever checked in. How the staff learned my name for more than charting, how the board learned my voice at meetings, and how Ashley learned what belonging really means. And yes, why nobody believes it when they see whose office that framed note hangs in now. It began with small edits to the life I thought I still ran. After Tom's funeral, when the casseroles cooled and the living room stopped smelling like lilies, Ashley started rearranging my days as if they were a cluttered bookshelf. It pleased her, I think, to see everything in straight lines. She stood in my kitchen holding a Sharpie and a stack of neon Post-its, asking where I kept the Tylenol and my reading glasses, and whether the oven was one of those old models that didn't beep if you left it on. I watched her write little notes in block letters. Turn off stove, lock side door, garage door, hold until light blinks. She stuck them on the fridge beside Oliver's crayon drawing of a red dinosaur. She told me it would help reduce cognitive load. I told myself it was love, because what else can a mother call it when her child insists on labeling the world for her? When I drove to Kohl's to find a black cardigan for the memorial service, she took my keys and said it would be easier if she drove. In the parking lot, she unbuckled me like I was 5. At the register, my card was declined because she'd put a fraud alert on my account. "Just in case you misplace your wallet, Mom." She handed over her own Visa and smiled tightly at the clerk, a smile I recognized from when she was 10, and hiding a broken vase behind her back. On the way home, she tuned the radio to the weather report and kept it there, as if small talk was a luxury we couldn't afford anymore. At my annual physical, she filled out my history before I'd finished untying my shoes. She's been repeating herself, she told Dr. Malik, not quite looking at me. She misplaced a bill last month. Her hip hurts on stairs. She fell in the garden in April, didn't you, Mom? April had been rain and worms and the smell of tomato vines. I had tripped over the hose and sat on the grass, laughing, earth under my nails, knees smudged like a kid's. It is a strange thing to hear your days recounted as frailty. Dr. Malik didn't argue with Ashley. He clicked boxes on a screen. He asked me to remember 3 words: apple, table, penny, which I did, and to draw a clock, which came out oval because the pen they gave me was dull. I laughed at the wonky numbers, but the nurse smiled in a way that wasn't smiling. Ashley slid a consent form across the desk and said, "Just sign, Mom. It's for access to your portal. I'll make sure the insurance pays the right way." I signed because in a hard year, the easiest thing had been saying yes. At home, she found my watercolor flyer from the community center, 6 weeks, Tuesday mornings, landscapes from photos, and set it aside with a click of her tongue. "You're hip, Mom," she said. Wanting and being able are 2 different things. She told me she'd made a spreadsheet of my meds and taped it to the inside of the pantry door. I opened it later, alone, and touched the paper where she'd typed my name. For a second, I saw not control, but care. A girl grown into a woman who didn't know how to be gentle, only efficient. Then there were the brochures, glossy, thick as catalogs, showing couples in matching cardigans playing bocce on a lawn, a woman with white hair wearing a cardigan the color of sherbet smiling over a salad bowl. Senior Living Simplified. Live without worry. Safety first for aging parents. I flipped through them the way you leaf old yearbooks. Not for yourself, but for the idea of yourself someone else decided on. I told myself it was nothing. She was busy. She needed to be reassured that I wouldn't slip on a banana peel and fracture my femur when she wasn't looking. I told myself daughters could love too hard and call it something else. But then the brochures started coming with sticky notes stuck to particular pages. The apartment floor plan circled, "This is nice and close to me." The shuttle schedule, "You wouldn't need to drive." The phrase "zero entry shower" underlined twice. The oranges in the sherbet cardigan's bowl reflected in the kitchen of an apartment nothing like my kitchen, where Tom had built a spice shelf because I kept knocking over the cinnamon. If there is a map of where the cracks began, one pin is the day my neighbor Mrs. Patel rang my bell with a traffic cone in hand. "Someone put this at the end of your driveway," she said. The cone had a handwritten sign taped to it. "Slow. Resident with limited mobility." Mrs. Patel rolled her eyes. "Ashley was here yesterday," she added. I took the cone, set it in the garage beside Tom's red toolbox, and told myself that cones could be this decade's way of saying I love you. Another pin, Oliver's 7th birthday at the trampoline park, the place loud enough to rattle your molars. I wore the red sweater Tom liked, the one he used to call my cherries in winter, and Ashley looked me up and down and said, "Maybe something less bright, Mom? It's a lot." She pressed a soft gray cardigan into my arms, the kind of thing you wear in waiting rooms. "I brought this for you," she said, in the tone of someone saving someone else from embarrassment. Later, when Oliver asked if I'd bring cinnamon rolls to his class on Monday, she touched his shoulder and said, "Maybe Nana shouldn't do the oven right now, baby. Remember what happened to Ms. Jean's grandma?" He nodded solemnly, pledged allegiance to safety. At home, alone, I baked 2 pans anyway and ate one of the sticky middle pieces with my fingers, defiant as a teenager. We tell the story of a betrayal by circling it. We count the small cuts because the big wound is already obvious. The big wound was Maple Grove. Ashley called it a brunch. German village, rustic toast and lattes, brick streets and planter boxes. I put my cookies in a tin with a gingham napkin, wore the red sweater just to prove I still could, and slid into her SUV smelling of new car and lemon sanitizer. In the passenger door pocket, a realtor's business card peeked out. Bethany Larson, Keller Williams, your home, your future. My stomach pinched. I didn't say anything because girls who grew up in libraries learn to wait for the paragraph that explains the title. We did not go to brunch. She took the exit by the hospital the way she used to take the exit to the mall when she was 16 and wanted to show me she knew the roads better than I did. Maple Grove had hedges clipped so neatly I wanted to mess them with my hands, just to see if anyone would notice. Inside, the receptionist smiled the tired smile of women who've been told to be polite while saying no. "Tour?" she chirped. Ashley's fingers tapped her phone, a rhythm I knew from homework nights. She had pre-registered me. She slid my wallet across the counter the way you slide a library card across a desk when you're paying your fines and feel ashamed. She pressed a note into my palm. "Mom, this is where you belong now." And then her voice was gone. An elevator bell was dinging, and I was inventory. Name, date of birth, allergies, a list of surgeries including one I'd forgotten I'd had in '83, when Oliver wasn't even a ghost. The first night a woman down the hall called for her husband until 2 in the morning, her voice rising and falling like sirens. My roommate, Dolores, snored through it, a foghorn on alternate breath. A nurse tilted a paper cup toward my mouth with 3 pills in it. "Your daughter asked us to manage your pain," she said, and I swallowed because my hip did hurt and also because there is something about a paper cup in someone else's hand that makes you do as you're told. The fluorescent lights hummed and hummed. The window showed a parking lot with a river of cars that did not carry my child back to me. People think of a locked ward like a prison. It is more like being parented by strangers. In the morning, a CNA named Ramon knocked and came in anyway. "Breakfast, Miss Margaret," he said. He was kind. He had a tattoo of a cardinal on his forearm that looked like it might fly off. He set down a tray with scrambled eggs that were too wet, and toast that was too dry, and a perfect round of melon that tasted like a refrigerator. There was coffee, which was a mercy, but it was weak, like someone had brewed it out of politeness. "Your daughter called," he added, almost offhand. "She said to make sure you don't strain yourself. Limit phone calls. She's worried you'll get overwhelmed." When I asked, the nurse said, "We keep valuables in the office. Your daughter signed the release." She opened a drawer and handed me the tin of cookies. One was missing, which someone had earned. But not my phone, not my keys, not the leather wallet Tom bought me on our 10th anniversary, embossed with my initials. "We can bring your phone during visiting hours," she said, but Ashley requested no unsupervised calls for now, just until you get settled. It was in the way the aide cooled my soup with a spoon, like I might scald myself if left to lift the bowl. It was in the sign someone taped to my door without asking, in cheerful font, "Please remind resident to call for help before standing." It was in the way the activities coordinator skipped me on the list for the library cart because maybe magazines are easier to start with. The secretary, Gina, with beautiful nails painted a green that reminded me of June, chewed her lip. "Your daughter left a durable power of attorney," she said carefully. "She's authorized your care decisions. It's really common." "When did we do that?" I asked, my voice light enough to float away. Gina looked at the screen. "Looks like..." She frowned. "The notary is... last month? Dr. Malik's office completed a capacity note when you sprained your hip." She smiled again, that trained smile that smooths a corridor of rough truth. "It's just to protect you, Margaret. Families need to feel secure. People who haven't lived in Ohio don't understand our love for our houses. They call them big for no reason or small for the price. But to me, our ranch with its brick face and the maple in the front was not square footage. It was chapters." Tom painted the shutters buckeye red against my protests, and I forgave him when the autumn light hit them just right. On the back wall of the garage, he'd built a pegboard full of hooks and outlined every tool in black marker, a museum of usefulness. On snow days, the smell of cinnamon rolls would seep under the bedroom door until Ashley would sprint down the hall in her mismatched socks, hair static, laughing. In summer, the porch light was a point on a map back home. In the hallway, one piece of tape had been holding up the corner of a photograph of Ashley at State, with her spelling bee ribbon since 1999. Upstairs, the cedar chest smelled like hope and mothballs, and held my mother's wedding dress, which no one wore but everyone touched. I gave tours of that house to anyone who asked, without knowing that one day someone would walk people through it and tell them to picture their furniture in my rooms. On the morning of the 3rd day in Maple Grove, I learned they already had. Lila Martinez was one of the few friends who never asked me if I'd thought of moving to a place where someone else would change the light bulbs. She and I sat together at church most Sundays, 2 widows with a 40-year friendship between us, of potlucks and casserole trains, and 1,000 whispered side comments during sermons. She taught me to make empanadas after Tom died because grief is easier with dough under your fingers. She looked nothing like the stereotype of a savior, short, soft, with wild hair, and everything like one on the day she appeared at the Maple Grove front desk with a loaf pan of banana bread and a gaze that could soften metal. "She's on the list for approved visitors," the receptionist said, surprised. Your daughter has limited the list, but she's here. Ashley blocked your number, she said, and just like that, my ribs remembered what breath wanted to do. I called and it went straight to voicemail. Then your message said your calls would be returned in a timely manner. I dialed the house and got a recording that the number had been changed. I went by to check on the porch plants and found men measuring the front windows. Bethany Larson was there with a clipboard. She called me sweetie and told me there was an open house on Sunday. My house on a screen that made it smaller, the room's lens bright. Charming 3-bedroom and friendly cul-de-sac. New roof 2015. Ideal for first-time buyers or downsizers. Estate sale. Motivated. There was a photo of the living room with my Afghan folded just so on the arm of the couch. In the corner of the frame, if you knew where to look, you could see the shadow of the tape where the spelling bee photo had been. The price was lower than I'd thought, but enough to tidy a number of spreadsheets. Motivated, Lila said. Do you know who is motivated? The word estate should not have been anywhere near the roof Tom had sweated under in August heat while I stood with him holding the ladder steady. She's helping, I said, and this time the lie tasted metallic and I couldn't swallow. Do you want me to get a lawyer? Lila asked. I know a woman who helped with my cousin's mess when his sister tried to sell their grandma's necklace. She will eat Ashley for breakfast. She told me she had found my spider plant on the porch with its leaves browned at the edges and had watered it, then brought it to her kitchen windowsill because I will not have your plant die of neglect like a metaphor. She told me she would come back tomorrow, and every tomorrow, even if Ashley took her off the list because I know how to be a mosquito. Your daughter and, let's see, Kevin will be here. Kevin had grown up in a town smaller than ours, raised by a mother who ran a diner and taught him how to flip eggs one at a time. He once came over to install a baby gate when Oliver toddled. He had called me Mrs. Collins even after I told him not to. He was not a bad man. But failing to stand up is its own species of cruelty. That night, I did not sleep. There is a time at 2 a.m. in a facility like Maple Grove when the lights dim and the sound of the building is a tide. I pictured my house empty, the way a mouth looks when a tooth is pulled. I pictured a young couple standing in my bedroom saying, "It's smaller than I thought," then laughing. I pictured Ashley at a closing table, hair smooth, pen crisp. I pictured the spreadsheet open on her laptop, the column labeled Net Proceeds. There is a point when grief laughs, not because anything is funny, but because the body can't hold it otherwise. In the morning, I laughed out loud in the shower under water that was lukewarm and the size of a pencil. Ramon knocked. "You okay?" he asked, and I wanted to tell him every story about every cinnamon roll I had ever baked. At 10 o'clock, I sat in a conference room that looked like every conference room in America. Oval table, anonymous art, coffee that had been on an open burner long enough to get a skin. Brittany had a stack of forms, and Mr. Lombardo, the administrator, had a tie that was trying too hard. Kevin sat on the end, eyes on his hands, the same hands that had clapped for Oliver at soccer. Ashley walked in last, 5 minutes late, her perfume like a lemon and something sharp. "Mom," she said, as if we were meeting for coffee. "Mrs. Collins," Mr. Lombardo intoned. "We're so glad you're here." "We're here to discuss long-term care planning," Brittany said. "Ashley has durable power of attorney and healthcare proxy, and Dr. Malik has provided a report recommending supervised living due to safety concerns. Your fall, again with the fall, and cognitive markers suggest." It had a notary stamp and Dr. Malik's signature and something about diminished capacity that sounded like it belonged to someone older than me. "This gives me authority," she said, "which I will use responsibly. This is not punishment, Mom. This is me being the adult. You raised me to be strong." She removed another paper from the folder. "We closed on the house," she said, and it was a sentence that needed to be said with more softness than she had. "It's done. I had to move quickly. The market is cooling and I can't carry 2 mortgages, and this place," she nodded around the room as if the walls were my new kitchen cabinets, "is not cheap. The proceeds are in a restricted account for your care. This is good, Mom. This is me being prudent." Lombardo, to the coffee pot with its skin. "It's better," he said finally. Oliver saw the basement stairs and the loose railing. He worried. "I had your mail forwarded to my address to make sure nothing gets missed. I switched your utilities. I canceled your garden plot. I called the community center about your watercolor class and asked for a refund. But I thought of the little green flags in May, and the first sweet peas, and the way Tom would pretend to hate weeding, so I would have to bribe him with lemonade. "Mom," Ashley said, and the word was a weapon now. "You belong here. You can't keep up. You leave the porch light on. You forget to lock the door. You call me 3 times in an hour because you can't find your purse and it's in the fridge. You signed the POA because you knew this was coming. You're cutting me off from my friends." Brittany nodded in a way that was meant to communicate care, but in fact communicated policy. "We hear you," she said to Ashley. "Our job is to support the family. Many residents thrive with structure and limited stimulation. It reduces sundowning." I thought of Ashley at 14, slamming her bedroom door so hard a frame tilted in the hallway, then hugging me a day later from behind while I washed dishes, her chin in the groove of my shoulder. We had always been a story of people doing their best with the lights available. The difference was that now she had put mine on a timer. "Why?" I said finally, and in that one word was the whole hallway of my life. Why this way? Why now? "Because every time I walk into your kitchen, I smell Dad's death." "Mom, don't make me be the bad guy. Please, you're safe here. This is where you belong." He looked like he wanted to say something, then didn't. "I'll tell Oliver you said hi," he offered. He patted my shoulder like you pat a pet that isn't yours. It is a particular loneliness to be left by a boy you used to bake cookies with because his parents are afraid of your disappointment. When they left, the room stayed airless. Brittany said I should try the music program at 3 because they were doing the Beach Boys. Mr. Lombardo told me if I had concerns, I should put them in writing. They left me with a pamphlet titled, "Making the Transition." I walked back to my room in my yellow socks and sat on the edge of the bed. Dolores snored. The goldfish turned and turned. On the bulletin board by the window, someone had pinned a flyer about a family barbecue on the 4th of July. This was an American place, full of American rituals, and written in blue ink, "Bring your own chair." I stared at the word bring until it broke into letters. Lila's banana bread waited under a napkin. I tore off a piece with my fingers and put it in my mouth, sugar and cinnamon and defiance. I looked at my hands, the hands that had held Ashley when she was a baby, that had tied her shoes, that had smoothed a Band-Aid over her skinned knee, that had stirred spaghetti sauce and turned pages and once, only once, slapped a countertop the day she said she hated me. They were 66 and mine. On the nightstand was a plastic frame with a stock photo of a smiling fake family that the facility used until someone put in their own picture. Beside it, forgotten, was the folded note from the first day that had ridden in with me in my cardigan pocket. I unfolded it. "This is where you belong," it said. No love, no mom, just a sentence like a wall. I flattened it with my palm until the crease lines disappeared. If she wanted to call this belonging, I would find a way to make belonging look like something she'd regret choosing as my cage. I taped the note to the inside of the drawer for now, my private compass. Outside my door, the fluorescent lights hummed. Down the hall, someone called a bingo letter in a voice more alive than you'd think. In the parking lot, the space Ashley had taken sat empty again, but I knew the shape of it now. It was not a loss I would fill with longing. It was a hole I would learn to dig through, 1 inch at a time, with fingernails if I had to. On the whiteboard on my wall, where someone had written today's date and the aide's name and the word goals, adjust, I uncapped the squeaky marker and added, in my own cramped librarian script, 1 line, "Find the contract." Because if a woman is going to be told she belongs somewhere against her will, the least she can do is learn the architecture of her cage. By dinner, I'd asked Ramon who handled billing. By bedtime, I'd learned where Mr. Lombardo kept the locked drawer, and which key on his ring had a nick you could feel with your thumb. Before I slept, I thought of Lila's mosquito vow and of Ashley's lemon-sharp perfume, and I let myself feel the anger, not the old grievance, but a clean new indignation that could power a small city. Oppression is an efficient teacher. It hands you your syllabus and dares you to read ahead. The residence rights poster was mounted crooked beside the fire extinguisher, the corners of the laminate lifting. I stood there with my yellow socks sliding on the tile and read it like scripture. The font was bureaucratic, but the sentences were small rebellions. You have the right to personal privacy. You have the right to receive visitors of your choosing. You have the right to manage your own finances unless a court has declared you incompetent. You have the right to reasonable access to a telephone. You have the right to voice grievances without fear of retaliation. I pressed my finger to each line as if I could absorb ink through skin. Reasonable, a slippery word I had taught 12-year-olds to distrust in rubrics. Visitors of your choosing, a phrase that sat in my mouth like hard candy. Without fear. At breakfast, I asked Ramon who handled billing because money was a map in any system. Gina takes payments, he said, balancing my eggs and Dolores's oatmeal on a tray like a man carrying fragile truths. Mr. Lombardo signs off on disbursements. Why? Lombardo's keyring lay on his desk, heavy as a choice, with a small plastic Buckeyes helmet keychain dangling from it. The second to smallest key had a nick near the top. When he picked them up later, his thumb brushed that nick the way your thumb finds a familiar chip in a favorite mug. I noted the shape of the lock on the file cabinet. Oppression is a patient teacher. It rewards observation. In the afternoon, I asked Gina if I could see my admission packet to straighten out my file. I used the same tone I used at the circulation desk when men asked for that one book with the blue cover, and I would tease them into remembering the author. Gina looked at me with caution but slid the folder across the counter. You can look at anything with your name on it, she said, but I can't let you take anything out of the office. Paper is a river. I could drink at the source. The admission agreement was thicker than a magazine. Ashley had signed as responsible party, and then, on 3 separate pages, as agent under POA. There was an arbitration clause circled in yellow highlighter. Disputes would not go to court but to a third-party arbitrator whose name sounded like a brand of cereal. There was a page titled Residents' Rights that looked like the poster in the hall, and another titled House Rules that turned the word soft into directives. It is recommended that residents not keep valuables in their rooms. It is recommended that families coordinate visitors through staff. It is recommended that residents limit calls during evening hours for rest. There were notes from my care plan meeting. Strengths: articulate, oriented to person and place. Concerns: perseverates on house and going home. Intervention: redirect, reassure, limit stimulation. There was a line from Dr. Melick's capacity note that made my tongue go dry. Mild cognitive impairment likely. In my professional opinion, the patient would benefit from supervised living due to safety concerns. There was a checkbox for do not resuscitate, unchecked but surrounded by an empty square like a mouth waiting for a decision. Can I get a copy? Shai asked, casual as offering a teenager a bookmark. Gina chewed her lip, that green nail polish flashing like summer grass. I can't make copies without a family member's permission, she said finally. Policy. She scribbled a phone number on the top of the page. Cuyahoga County Long-Term Care. Ombudsman. Older Americans Act made flesh. I folded the paper and slid it into the banana bread tin when no one was looking. There are times to shelve and times to stash. On the way back to my room, I passed the activity room where the Beach Boys were oohing in unison through a speaker that was a little too tinny. A woman with white hair danced in her chair, arms sweeping the air. There was a bin of colored pencils on the table. I pocketed one. Not because I am a thief, but because dissent needs tools. That evening, when the fluorescent lights hummed like a chorus of bees, I wrote a letter on the back of my residence rights copy, in my small, neat librarian hand. Lila, my spider plant mother, my emergency dough maker. The house is gone, but the paper trail isn't. Ashley used durable POA to sign. Dr. Malick wrote capacity after my fall. There's an arbitration clause. They are restricting my calls and visitors against posted rights. The ombudsman number is above. Find out whether the deed shows my signature. It won't. The open house sign said estate. I am not an estate. Check the county recorder. If there is a transfer on death affidavit, contest it. Ask Bethany about the earnest money. Can it be held if there's a dispute? Call whoever your cousin used. I am in Maple Grove, room 214. Bring frosting. Love, M. I folded the letter into a square so small it could hide under a thumbnail. I tucked it into the seam of the banana bread tin under the waxed paper, a secret inside sweetness, because women have been hiding things in kitchens since fire found us. I put the tin back on the nightstand, innocent as a gift. Sunday was the day Oliver came. The receptionist called up to let me know, and something like weather changed behind my ribs. I combed my hair, the act itself a prayer. I wore the red sweater because I refused to let my clothes be an apology. I slipped the note from the drawer into the pocket of the cardigan. This is where you belong, and felt it like a small blade. I tugged white socks over the terrible yellow, my own quiet protest. Ashley arrived on lemon and heels. Oliver ran ahead of her and threw his arms around my waist with a force that knocked me back a step. He smelled like school glue and clean boy. Nana, he said into the wool, we got a new Lego set. It has a crane. She held up her phone. We're going to do a little video, Mom. For Aunt Sue, for the group chat. Say hi, say you're settling in, so everyone stops worrying. It'll be good for Oliver to see you smile. She said it like flossing a child's teeth, firm and unavoidable. Oliver had my face in his hands. Are there movies here? He asked. Is it like a hotel? The eternal mother of our times, the schedule. We brought cinnamon rolls, Kevin offered, lifting the bakery box as if it might counterbalance something. From Morning Glory, thought of you. I want to show Nana my crane. He looked like a kid in 9th grade called on to read a poem he didn't understand. Also, Ashley added, as if she'd remembered to pick up milk, I brought some forms. Dr. Malik said we should get a DNR in place, given the hip and your blood pressure. You always said you didn't want to be a burden, remember? This is just formalizing loving choices. It's standard. I recognize the architecture of that page. Check boxes that turn wishes into orders. Do not resuscitate. Limited interventions. Comfort care. She set a pen on top of it like a period. Sign, and then we'll have cake. It came out small at first, a pebble landing on water. Ashley blinked. Mom, be reasonable. And the DNR is your value. You told me when I was 15 and Grandma was in hospice that you didn't want machines. Don't make this hard. You know how Oliver gets when there's tension. He internalizes. We've talked about that in therapy. I am trying to protect my child. We have to show we're prudently using your assets for your care, not just letting you hoard things that don't matter. The cedar chest? We should sell it. The china? It's chipped. The quilt? I know it means something to you, but... Ashley leaned across the dresser to neaten the pile of things that were mine. Her hand brushed the note in my cardigan pocket when I reached for a tissue. The paper slid out and fluttered to the carpet. Ashley bent to pick it up. She unfolded it. Her eyes flicked over the Helvetica, her own sentence looking back at her like a judgment. This is where you belong. She laughed, a small exhale. Oh, Mom, don't be melodramatic. Something in me unlatched. I reached out and took it from her. Quick. A motion I knew from grabbing paper from toddlers before they ate it. Don't touch my things, I said. And I sounded like every mother in a grocery store and also like sovereign law. Ashley straightened, color rising in her cheeks. We are not doing this. We are not making everything into a metaphor. It's a note. The facility is your home now. Accept it. We have grief to get through and lives to live. Sign the DNR, do the video, and we'll all get on with our day. When the door snicked shut, I let myself look at Ashley full on. The girl in her flickered under the woman like a pilot light. Here is what is true, I said, and each word felt like a stepping stone across a stream that had wanted to sweep me. You are scared, I began. You are angry. You are tired. I do not deny you any of that. I recognize it the way I recognize my own hands. But you have turned fear into a justification for undoing me. You are calling it help, because you can't stand the thought that you might be hurting me in the name of help. You have told your son a story that makes control a synonym for love, and that will make a knot in him that will take him years to untie. You have taken my house because you wanted to stop smelling dad in the walls, and because equity is a number that looked like a solution. You brought me here with a note because you did not trust yourself to say the sentence to my face. And now you want me to perform gratitude into your phone so that when it gets hard, you can watch it and say, see? She agreed. You made a speech the night I wanted to go to Jamie's party, and you said no because there might be boys and beer. You make speeches to make yourself the good person. You have lived on words your whole life while other people hauled the Christmas bins down from the attic. But I am still a person. You do not get to take away my life and then script my gratitude. You need medication to help with anxiety, and you refuse it like it's an insult instead of chemistry. She gestured at the DNR again. And you need to decide how you want to die. Adults make decisions. Primary custody, court dates, the house he managed to rent within Oliver's school district by saying yes to extra shifts and saying no to things that mattered to him. Ashley's doing her best, he said finally, which was another way of saying he would not step between us. Kevin, I said, and my voice did the thing it does when you have said a name out loud every week for 7 years, and then you realize you do not know what to put after it. If Oliver asked you what love is, would you tell him it was paperwork? The sound was small but satisfying. I held her gaze and tore it again, into quarters, then into 8. Confetti you don't throw at weddings. I dropped the pieces into the trash can next to my bed with the slow deliberation of ceremony. She watched, mouth a thin line that looked dangerous. You just invalidated your wishes, she said. You just made it worse for you. The air had the crackle of an August afternoon before lightning finds a tree. Then Ashley moved. She went for the nightstand, for the banana bread tin. I don't know why, maybe to neaten. Maybe because she needed to control a surface. Her fingers lifted the lid. She reached in for the wax paper, for the slice I'd been saving for after Oliver left, because sugar can be a friend. "Don't," I said, sharper than I intended. It wasn't the bread. It was what hid under it. It was the idea that she could touch whatever she wanted. She kept going, as if hearing "don't" from me at this point was a mosquito whine. I stood. My hip remembered April and complained, but standing felt like a requirement of personhood. I reached across and slammed the lid down on her hand. Not hard, but hard enough that the metal rang. She jerked back and looked at me with astonishment, then anger. "You just hit me," she said, as if we were 10 and sharing a back seat. "I stopped you," I said. "You don't get to take everything." He had colored the crane blue and put a tiny red dot where its eye should be. He looked at our faces without the protective fog adults have when they walk into tension. Kids recognize danger by the way the air goes thin. "Mommy?" he said. Ashley smoothed her hair, a gesture so practiced it was muscle. "We're fine, baby," she said, that too bright voice that makes a child learn to distrust his own instincts. "Oliver," I said, kneeling because he deserved a grandmother whose eyes were level with his. "Do you remember the porch light at my house?" He didn't, not fully, but he nodded in the moral way small humans do when they see adults needing affirmation. Ashley exhaled, impatient. "Enough metaphors. We're leaving. We'll revisit when you've calmed down, Mom." She reached for the banana bread tin again, thought better of it, reached for her phone instead. "If you won't do this the easy way, I will do what needs to be done. I'll talk to Mr. Lombardo about moving you to memory care for increased support until we can get the guardianship finalized. You're demonstrating agitation and poor judgment. We can adjust your meds. An Ativan patch will help." He had the unerring instinct for the center of the storm, the way children do who have been taught to find the adult who is steady. Ashley saw his fingers in mine, and something old and ugly passed through her eyes. The flash of a girl who had to make her own lunches in middle school and decided love was a scarce good. "Let him go," she said. I kissed his knuckles. "In a minute," I told him. "I have to say a thing." He nodded. He let me be the adult who made promises and kept one. I turned to Kevin. "Now is the minute when a good man says, 'Ashley, let's not medicate a woman because she disagrees with us.' Now is when you become someone your son will thank later. Or you stay quiet and he learns a lesson you don't want him to learn." "It's not my call," he said at last. And there it was, the failure not even announced as failure, just draped over a sentence like a coat you don't plan to wear again. I felt the clean anger again. The energy of a city lit up. I stood taller. "Mr. Lombardo," I called, because sometimes you have to ring the bell the building pretends not to hear. He appeared in my doorway like a man who knows something is about to cost him. "Yes?" he said, too pleasant. "You have a residence rights poster in your hall," I said. "It is mounted crooked. I would like to exercise mine. Reasonable access to a telephone. I want to call the ombudsman. And my physician of choice, not Dr. Malik, who wrote a capacity note without telling me the day I had dirt under my nails. I want copies of every form I signed and every form signed on my behalf. And I want you to note, on whatever you note, that I do not consent to medication for staff convenience or for the convenience of family members who are tired. It can be dysregulating." "Collins, let's take a breath," he said, as if breath were a substitute for justice. "We want you to feel safe." She held the note up between us like a banner, then reached to tear it. I moved faster than I knew I still could. I snatched it back and stepped away, the end of the bed bumping the back of my knees. The note crinkled in my fist. "You don't get this," I said. "You already had your sentence. You wrote it. You don't get to erase it because it makes you uncomfortable to see your own words reflected." I heard the child in that sentence, the way children understand winning as the only way to survive. "I have legal authority." He looked at me with a look that wanted to be an ally and failed. "We'll circle back in the morning," he promised. And I imagined men in ties doing laps around complicated women. Ashley stared at him as if he had betrayed her tribe. Then she looked at me. For a second, her face folded, a small old grief creasing her. I could see her at 8, bringing me a picture of a horse with too many legs and asking if it was beautiful, and me saying, "It's interesting," because I thought interesting was a compliment, and she took it as a wound. I saw all the miscommunications that had made our life. "Oliver," she said, voice flat with decision. "We're going. Say goodbye." Dolores snored in her half of the room. The goldfish turned and turned. Somewhere a pair of walkers clicked down the hall like metronomes. I picked up the residence rights page from the tin and read the ombudsman number again. Then I did the thing I had been waiting to do. I took the colored pencil from my pocket and wrote in giant letters on the whiteboard where someone had written goals. Adjust. I do not consent to restricted calls or visitors. I understand my rights. Bring a phone. Then I propped the door open with my shoe. Little acts of open vessels. Ramon came by with the dinner card at 5. He paused in the doorway and read the whiteboard. His mouth twitched, which in some men is a smile. "The cardinal," I said, nodding toward his forearm. "Does it mean anything? And if your route takes you past the front desk, ask Gina for a copy of the visitor policy. Tell her Margaret asked. There is a way to do this right." I asked, aiming for breezy, landing somewhere desperate. "After 6, he said, a map woven into simple words. "When Brittany goes home, sometimes the cordless from the nurse's station needs to be charged. It sits in the cradle. Sometimes the cradle doesn't hold on to it very tight. She was the one who taught me where the edges of decency are, between the lines." The phone sat like a loaf of bread no one wanted to claim. I moved my hand in and took it. No one shouted. I walked back to my room with the careful, casual gait of thieves in nursery rhymes. I dialed the ombudsman. A message. Press 1 to leave a voicemail. Press 2 if the resident is in immediate danger. I pressed 1 because if I pressed 2, I feared that someone with a siren would arrive and put me in a different kind of cage. I left my name. I left my facility. I said, "My daughter used a durable power of attorney to admit me to a locked unit against my wishes and sold my house as an estate, while I am very much not an estate. The facility is limiting my calls and visitors without a court order. I have not been adjudicated incompetent. I am asking for an advocate. I am asking for a review. I am asking very simply for the right to speak to my friend and my pastor and my own doctor. My grandson is watching what happens. I would like him to see something that looks like an adult system functioning." My voice did not shake until the end. I hung up and felt the particular quiet that follows a thrown rock. I called Lila. Her number went to voicemail. "It's me," I said, the word me reaching out for her name. "The tin is not just bread." I hung up. I set the phone back in its cradle like a baby you're returning to a mother you hope can respond to her own child next time. At 9, when the yellow socks shuffle of the evening turned into the television blues, Gina appeared in my doorway holding an extra copy of the facility's visitor and phone policy, like a woman smuggling bread rolls from a banquet. "We're not supposed to post this," she said. "It encourages expectations." She smiled ruefully. "I like expectations." It said the right to have visitors could only be restricted by the resident, a court order, or a documented clinical need for short-term intervention. It said phones were available in common areas for all residents. It said residents had the right to personal devices under the facility's reasonable safety policies. Reasonable again, elastic as taffy. But still. Words. "Thank you," I said. "If someone asks, tell them I stole it." "Generous," she said. And I laughed for the first time that day, a noise that didn't hurt. I slept badly. I dreamed of open houses where people moved through my life in socks so as not to scuff it. I woke at 2, to the sound of Dolores rattling, and the building breathing, and the image of Ashley's face when I tore the DNR. It had been fury and grief and relief, all stapled together. There are moments when telling the truth gives the other person their own truth, and they hate you for it. Morning brought the smell of eggs and the clatter of trays. I made a list with the colored pencil because librarians know that a list can turn panic into plan. Find out. Where are my keys? Where is my purse? Ask Mr. Lombardo for copies anyway. Ask Brittany to put my refusal to restricted calls in writing. Find Dr. Malik's number. Ask for second opinion. Dr. Nguyen at church? Ask Ramon what time the cleaning crew goes into admin. Ask if the front door code is the year of the facility's founding. People always think they're being clever when they are being obvious. I saw Ashley's lemon in the hallway before I saw Ashley. She came that morning with a look that said she had not slept and had rehearsed a speech in front of the bathroom mirror. She had a new folder. She had a new pen. She had Oliver's absence. That was the first thing I noticed. No small boy to stand between us and make us both behave. We are doing this the formal way, she said without preamble. I spoke to an attorney last night. She said your refusal to sign a DNR is your right, but it complicates planning. Fine. Sign this instead. It's a statement of preference. It says you prefer not to be resuscitated and authorize me to speak for you if you can't. It says you chose Maple Grove of your own free will, and that any past statements to the contrary were because you were grieving and confused. It says you consent to visitor limits as needed for your adjustment period. It says you will not contact Lila or your church for 30 days so you can focus on settling in. You'll do a short video to that effect, so there's a record. She put the paper on my bed like she was placing a placemat. If you don't, I file for emergency guardianship and move you to memory care today. You will be medicated if you're combative. You will not see Oliver until it's safe for him. Your choice, Mom. No, I said for the third day in a row, the way you say the first word of a new language until it loses its awkwardness in your mouth. I am not signing away my relationships, so your narrative is tidy. I am not recording false testimony against myself. And if you move me to memory care and sedate me because I won't cooperate, I will tell every person in every hallway and every son and daughter who walks in here what you did. I will write it on the whiteboard in permanent marker. I will write it on my skin. I turned to Ashley, to the girl in the lemon perfume. I love you, I said, because that is not a trick sentence when it is true. That is why I won't let you practice cruelty in my name. You are standing at a fork. One way, you get to be right. The other, you get to be good. I know which I am choosing. I held her gaze until she looked away. She left without slamming the door. That felt worse. Ramon came with lunch like a messenger between kingdoms. He set down the tray and didn't go. The cardinal sat on the fence this morning, he said without looking at me. Twice. My grandma says that means someone is insisting. His tie lay on the back of his chair like a flag. The key ring sat on the desk, the Buckeyes helmet winking. I picked them up. I weighed them. I felt the nick in the second smallest key with my thumb. I put them down again because I am not a thief. Yet. I sat in his chair because sometimes sitting in a seat is a rehearsal for climbing out of it. I looked at the file cabinet, gray and dull and full of stories printed like fact. I stood and opened the top drawer. It was, unbelievably, unlocked. I did not take anything. I did not need to. My name was on a tab. I traced it with my finger. I closed the drawer. I left the office with my heart arranged differently. Back in my room, I took the little blue crane Oliver had left on the bed. I folded my letter to Lila around it like a second skin. If Ashley frisked me on the way to a prison yard, let her take my cardigan. She would not think to confiscate paper birds. When Lila came, because Lila would come, mosquitoes always find a way in, I would hand her the bird and say nothing and everything at once. That night, as the building hummed and a woman down the hall called for her husband who had been dead 15 years and would come anyway because names are stubborn, I slept with the note under my pillow. This is where you belong. It scratched my cheek through the pillowcase. An annoyance. A summons. By morning, I had a plan. It was not elegant. It was not legal enough to make Mr. Lombardo happy. It required me to rely on the kindness of people paid to be kind, and the courage of a friend who had never needed a script to do the right thing. It required me to use the whiteboard and the janitor's closet and the fact that this building was built in 2003, a year that would be relevant to a door code if you were a man who wore a Buckeyes helmet on his keys. At 10, Brittany came with a behavior chart. We've initiated increased structure, she said. No unsupervised calls, immediate family only. We'll reassess in 2 weeks. We're concerned about your adjustment, she said. Ashley. She had on a floral dress that made me think of July and defiance. She carried a pie in one hand and a tote bag like a guerrilla weapon. Behind the front desk, Gina looked at the list, and then at Lila, and then at me all the way down the hall and chose to misread a line. She's on the approved list, she said to the empty air in a voice that would stand up in court. Lila walked into my room like a storm that brings electricity and cleans the air. I brought peach pie, she announced to Dolores, who snored. And for the record, I am so mad I could eat a fence. She put the pie down. She hugged me hard enough to bruise. Don't say I told you so, she whispered. Just say, let's go. We have been together at enough church raffles to know how to pass contraband. Also, I said, because the indignation was buzzing through me like sugar, I tore a DNR in half. Lombardo appeared in the door with Brittany, looking like the B team of a football game. Lila is not on the approved list, he said nervously. Gina appeared behind him, all 10 fingers green, and tapped the sheet. She is today, she said. Policy says the resident gets to choose. We ate pie with our fingers because forks were a luxury. The juice ran down our wrists. It made us sticky. It made us laugh. Oppression is messy, I said, and she dabbed her chin. Freedom too, she replied. When she left, she kissed my cheek and whispered, "The county recorder's office opens at 8. Bethany hung a sold rider, but the deed hasn't recorded. If it hasn't recorded, it isn't done. There is an escrow. I have a name." The ombudsman called me back because I am rude and left 3 messages. She will be here at 11 tomorrow. Wear the red sweater. You always did know how to organize a revolt, she said. You just called it a bake sale. She looked smaller, not in bone, but in certainty. The real estate agent called, she said. There's a hiccup. The buyer's agent flagged the estate language. We'll fix it. Her voice dared me to be pleased that something had broken for her. I made banana bread, I said. There's a piece missing. Consider it earned. I'm very good at starting things. Then, because I didn't want this to be only punishment between us, because I refused to teach Oliver that love is brittle, I added, you can still be good, you know. I meant it. She looked at me for a long time like someone deciding whether to cut the red wire or the blue wire on a bomb that had her own name written on it. You are impossible, she said finally, and for once it sounded like a compliment. No, I said. Just alive. Nana, find the light. There is always a moment in any story where the person you are becomes the person you meant to be. For me, it was a whiteboard, a note, a bird, a phone call, a friend with pie, a nurse with a cardinal, and a daughter who had to watch me refuse to be erased. I curled around Oliver's drawing like it was a small animal that needed my heat. I slept. I dreamed of lights that stayed on because someone had decided to be the person who kept them on. Tomorrow would come with its elevators and its bells and its terrible coffee and its ombudsman who would wear shoes meant for walking into rooms like mine and saying, "How can I help?" I slept with the note under my pillow and woke up with a list in my head like a litany. Ombudsman, county recorder, attorney, evidence. Red sweater, call Lila, wear red, be unignorable. The ombudsman, Janice, arrived on time. Shoes that looked like they'd walked into 1,000 awkward rooms and not flinched. She had a badge and a folder and the patient calm of someone who'd learned how to be both advocate and bureaucrat. She sat on the edge of my bed and took my hands in hers like it was permitted to be simple. You did the right thing calling, she said, matter of fact and tender. We get calls like yours, but we don't get them from women who come to us prepared. She moved to the whiteboard and copied down my statement. Durable POA used to place resident in facility, sale listed as estate, restricted calls, lack of informed consent. She wrote beneath it, action. Advocate will call county recorder, contact title co. 8, open complaint with state licensing, request emergency review. By 9, I had an appointment with an elder law attorney Janice recommended, Marisol Reyes, who kept her office above a bakery and smelled faintly of sugar and good strategy. Marisol was in her 40s, quick, with an old Harvard law fatigue to the corners of her mouth that read as gravitas, not coldness. She listened to my story and then said things adults in movies say at climactic moments. Only real. We can stop this, but we need to move fast. If the deed hasn't recorded, we have leverage. We can file a TRO and a LIS pendens. We'll ask the court to freeze any escrow account and to suspend the POA while we get an independent capacity exam. We'll allege undue influence and breach of fiduciary duty and seek immediate injunctive relief. Originals or copies of any POA papers, the admission packet, any emails or texts from Ashley about the house, the realtor, the lender, or title company name if I had them. She also asked for a signed statement about how I came to Maple Grove and what I understood at the time. We'll want witnesses, she said. Lila, Gina, Ramon, anyone who can corroborate. Peach pie and ferocity, and a list of witness names a foot long. She'd already called the county recorder the night before. Bethany's open house had shown up in the activity feed, but the deed had not cleared the recorder's office. Buyer's agent flagged estate, she said, settling into the chair and tucking the tote under it like she might need the gravity later. They asked questions. There's earnest money in escrow but not recorded. We're lucky, Maggie. It's sloppy on someone's part. She subpoenaed agent and realtor communications. She asked the clerk for appointment times and looked at me over her glasses with a look that meant, we go now. What about the POA? I asked. Can you stop her from acting on it? We need to show either that you lacked capacity at the time the POA was used or that your daughter used the POA for her own advantage. Undue influence. Emails, the realtor listing, the credit card fraud alert at the mall, those are the threads. Marisol drove the petition down to the county courthouse with me in the passenger seat. My fingers wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that tasted like courage. In the hallways of the courthouse, the air smelled like dry polish and persistence. The clerk gave us a judge's calendar with a kindness only stray dogs understand. This was not spectacular, but it mattered enough to be fast-tracked. The judge, Judge Hargrove, granted an ex parte temporary restraining order that evening. Freeze the escrow, suspend Ashley's powers under the POA pending hearing, notify the title company, preserve documents. The order arrived at my email like a small weapon. Marisol did more. She sent a demand letter to Bethany Larson and Maple Oak Title, copying the escrow officer. She asked the title company to place a hold and to provide a full accounting of any disbursements. She arranged for an independent geriatric psychiatrist, Dr. Nguyen, the one I'd half remembered from church, to come and do a capacity exam in the next 2 days. She circled names on her phone's contact list like a general assigning battalions. I felt ridiculous and human and blessedly alive. For 2 days, I let others move while I rested at Lila's, which was the withdrawal Marisol had insisted on. A short strategic retreat to distance me from the immediacy of the facility, to keep me from being poked into rashness while the law did its slow work. Lila's house smelled of peppermint and coconut oil, and the kind of garlic onions that announce dinner is both imminent and inevitable. She tucked the little blue crane on the mantel like a talisman. Ashley called. Endless strings of calls. I let them go to voicemail. Once, shortly after the TRO was filed and I was safe in a booth at the church diner, she left a message that sounded like a woman talking into the wind. "You don't get to play games with my life, Mom," she said. "I did what I had to do. I will fight you. I will make sure you're okay. And if you lie in court, they will see your handwriting. They will see that you signed. Consider your options." The last sentence leaked bravado. The rest was tremor. She did not yet understand that frightened people sound like they're in control until someone with a calendar and a subpoena begins to translate fear into evidence. Marisol subpoenaed the title company. She demanded communications from Bethany and the buyer's agent. She demanded escrow account numbers and wiring histories. And she asked the court to issue a protective order, freezing assets pending the hearing. In the background, she filed our complaint with the State Nursing Home Licensing Board against Maple Grove for facilitating the restrictions without clinical justification, for limiting calls, for accepting the POA as if it were an unchallengeable edict. Janice, the ombudsman, filed her own complaint and joined us. The facility got a letter from the county investigator. Suddenly, Mr. Lombardo's emails read like someone with a matchmaking problem between confidence and caution. I had Mr. Lombardo's keys on my mind less, and the weight of legal notice more. Paper is not the same as power, but sometimes paper gets the doors to open. When the title company replied, it did what companies do when their balance sheet smells like trouble. It produced documents. There were earnest money receipts, copies of the purchase agreement with the problematic estate language flagged by the buyer's agent, messages from Bethany to Ashley confirming expedited closing because market's turning. There was, crucially, the escrow account number and a note from the escrow officer. Funds held but not dispersed pending title clearance. There were also texts between Ashley and Bethany. "We have to close before she remembers everything." The text looked different when you read it as evidence. Marisol took screenshots and circled them like bones on a diagram. "Undue influence," she said simply. "This is exactly what we need to show motive." She printed everything twice and then again because redundancy is the attorney's prayer. At the emergency hearing, Marisol entered them into the record. She argued that the POA had been used to deprive me of my home without true informed consent, that the admission to Maple Grove had been procured by misrepresentation, that my phone and visitors had been restricted in violation of my rights, and that the sale, labeled estate while I was very much alive, raised the specter of exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Judge Hargrove listened like someone who'd been raised on equal parts law and common sense. He asked for evidence. He asked if my capacity had been evaluated and on what terms. He ordered a temporary freeze on both the escrow and any disbursement of proceeds. He suspended Ashley's authority under the POA for the duration of a full evidentiary hearing and ordered an immediate, independent capacity evaluation. The judge's order felt like the first real sunlight in months. It did not fix everything. Legal process is a stew, not a miracle. but it bought us the time to untangle what had been tightened into a knot. News travels in small circles that feel large. By the time I drove back to Maple Grove, wearing my red sweater like an exclamation point, people had started to look at me differently. Gina avoided my eye with a smile that had less armor. Ramon offered the tray with a tiny bow. Lila met me in the lobby and hugged me like a person who knows a good fight is both lonely and worth joining. Ashley watched me arrive from a distance, her arms folded so tightly they looked like she was trying to keep herself from falling apart. "You got lucky," she said, the accusation and the admission braided into one. "I got an advocate," I corrected, "and the law, that's not luck." There, finally, I let the words fall. "You made choices about my life for your reasons. You thought you were protecting yourself. You thought you were protecting Oliver. That is not protection if it strips someone of agency." She sat with me in a room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and old paperbacks, and asked me questions that felt like a warm-up for a conversation I should have had 5 years ago. Days of the week backwards, recall tasks, executive function tests. She watched me fold a paper crane and asked about my garden, my finances, my understanding of the house's value. At the end, she said, without fanfare, that I had mild cognitive impairment, which 1,000 people had said with 1,000 implications. But she also said I had the capacity to make financial decisions and to understand the nature and consequences of the sale at the time the documents were argued to have been signed, or at least enough ambiguity existed that it could not be found beyond reasonable doubt in the short term. Ambiguity favors the living human being. It favors process. That phrase, enough ambiguity, was a hinge on which the next weeks turned. The hearing that followed was human, small, and huge. Marisol laid out a timeline: Kohl's, the fraud alert, the Sharpie-labeled Tylenol note, the realtor's sticky notes, the cone at the end of my drive, the text messages asking for a fast close, the POA granted the week after Dr. Malik's visit. She argued undue influence, isolation, control of my communications, persuasion in the context of grief. She argued breach of fiduciary duty. Ashley used authority that should have aimed to preserve my best interests, not her financial planning. Ashley's counsel argued the opposite, that the transfer was voluntary, that the POA was executed lawfully, that the move to Maple Grove had been in my best interest. In cross-examination, however, texts, emails, and Mr. Lombardo's notes made a story of coordination emerge. Mr. Lombardo was embarrassed into candor when pushed about signature chains and policy. The facility had accepted the POA and had not independently verified capacity beyond the document provided by Dr. Malik. The judge looked at the stack of papers before him like a man staring at a map he couldn't fully redraw. The ruling was not a flame. It was a steady, decisive stroke. Judge Hargrove found that there was probable cause to believe undue influence and breach of fiduciary duty had occurred, and continued the injunction. The sale remained frozen. Ashley's POA stayed suspended pending a full trial, and the court appointed a temporary conservator to manage my finances in an interim role separate from Ashley. The judge also referred Maple Grove to the state licensing board for review of its intake policies. The title company issued a statement that it would hold the funds until the court directed otherwise. Bethany Larson's broker was asked to provide a full file to the court. When the order was read aloud in the courtroom, I felt tears like small stones fall hot and immediate. Lila gripped my hand so tightly I thought she might hurt herself. Kevin sat in the back with his jaw clenched, his face ashen, as if the math of his life had shifted under him. Ashley stood afterward like a woman who had been promised a straight path and found a barricade. She put her hand to her mouth a few times and then let it fall. For the first time in weeks, she looked uncertain. After the hearing, there were settlements and statements and more paper, as if the world had finally decided to translate moral injury into an accounting ledgers would accept. Ashley was required by the court to produce a full accounting of all transactions she'd authorized and to release any disbursements she'd made. The temporary conservator looked through my bank records and found that yes, utility accounts had been changed, some items were sold off in haste to pay for adjustments, but there were no big wire transfers that had disappeared beyond recovery. A middle-class woman's life is messy, but not always disastrously so. Bethany produced emails showing haste and pressure. The buyer, nervous by the litigation cloud, withdrew from the purchase, or rather, the buyer's attorney wrote a letter that felt like a withdrawal with a condition: rescind the sale and we'll talk later. The escrow officer held the earnest money in a trust account untouched. There was a criminal inquiry looming at the edge of all this, but Marisol advised caution. Sometimes the public blood is worse than the private ledger. We want justice that lasts, she said. We'll seek civil remedies, rescission of sale, damages for breach of fiduciary duty, and ideally a formal apology and restoration of your property or its value. If criminal charges make sense, the state will pursue them. But right now, our work is to anchor your life back to you. Shifting, relentless, and eventually clearing. Weeks passed with hearings and paper and Dr. Nguyen's fuller neurocognitive report. She testified that while I had some memory slippage typical of my age, there was enough evidence of possible undue influence and of the daughter's goal-oriented actions, pressuring, isolating, managing finances, to warrant undoing the sale until a full trial could be held. The judge agreed. In the meantime, something else changed at home. Kevin, who had been a man who liked small, quiet things, started to show up in clearer ways. He came to a meeting with the conservator and, facing the court, said something I almost didn't expect. "I didn't know," he said. "I thought Ashley was doing what needed to be done. She asked me to sign off on things because she wanted backup. I see now how that looked. I'm sorry." His apology was small, an echo of a larger regret, but it was honest. He pledged to facilitate Oliver's continued visits and to enroll in family counseling. Not perfect, not absolution, but a turning. Ashley's unraveling took many forms. In private deposition, she cried and said she'd been exhausted and scared of losing her son's future to an old house and an old grief. In emails, she admitted cutting corners. In a moment of clarity during mediation, she turned to me and said, "I thought I was protecting us." I said back, "The way you finally say what matters. You were protecting a future you wanted. You forgot to ask me if my present fit inside it." Her face crumpled like paper. The civil suit settled eventually on terms that read as a victory and a compromise. The sale was rescinded because the deed hadn't recorded and because both the buyer and the realtors preferred not to be entangled in a contested estate. Ashley was ordered to reconcile the accounts. The proceeds in escrow were returned. Attorney fees were awarded against her in part. She was required to pay for a formal accounting of assets and to attend financial counseling and restorative family sessions. The court stripped her of the POA and admonished her for using that trust in ways inconsistent with its fiduciary duty. The judge ordered the facility to update its policies on accepting POAs, to require clearer documentation of clinical need for restrictive measures, and to submit to an audit by the state licensing board. Mr. Lombardo was put on notice with a formal letter from the state. The conservator's role phased out as I reassumed control in a measured way with safeguards. A third-party accountant temporarily assisted me with bill paying, not because I couldn't, but because the court liked visible checks. There was no dramatic homecoming in the sense of a single camera pan over a newly manicured lawn, but there were moments of return. I unlocked my front door with the same brass key Tom had given me and felt a weight lift I didn't know was there. The pegboard in the garage still had the black marker outlines of the tools. The cedar chest survived. Lila and a handful of church ladies came over the first weekend after the settlement, and we baked cinnamon rolls until the house smelled like the mornings I'd made these things when Tom was still alive. We filled the kitchen with voices. We lit the porch light that night like a beacon and didn't turn it off when sleep came. Ashley and I began to talk, halting and flawed. There were truths that needed to be spoken and consequences that needed to be met. She apologized, not as an admission that fixed everything, but as a recognition of the harm between us. "I was wrong," she told me once, eyes wet and blunt. "I let fear make choices for me. I scared myself into doing the wrong thing." She offered restitution beyond what the court had ordered. Therapy for both of us. A commitment to transparency. Supervised visitation protocols until trust could be rebuilt. Kevin supported a plan that included family counseling and a slow reintegration of access, with clear boundaries. There were small, concrete acts of restitution that mattered. Ashley wrote a letter to the court acknowledging her misuses. She attended a financial management course required by the court. She met with Lila and me at the community center, and we baked together, badly and laughably, and spoke about the ways grief had fumbled our language. There were evenings when she sat with Oliver and read him books I used to read. There were other evenings when she texted me a picture of a sunrise. Not miraculous. Not enough, perhaps, for everyone. But a change that was visible and human. The moral victory, the one that glowed, was not simply tethered to ink on a deed or a judge's signature. It came when Mr. Lombardo instituted a transparent visitor policy, and when Gina put a copy of residents' rights in a frame by the front desk where everyone could see it. It came when the state auditor flagged a procedural problem at Maple Grove and a training program rolled out for intake staff about power of attorney abuse. It came when Kevin, weeks later, stayed with Oliver at my house for an evening so I could teach a watercolor class at the community center, and when he called afterward to say quietly, "You were right about the porch light." I took the recipe Tom loved and made sure the sugar melted in the way he liked. And I brought them to Lila and to the ladies who'd prayed and the men who'd nodded and the kids who'd asked where Nana's house was when they pictured their maps. Oliver came, of course, and together we made a paper crane folding station for kids. He glued a tiny porch light above his crane, and we hung them over the coffee pots like tiny beacons. At the end of that day, after the chairs had been stacked and the last roll eaten, I went home. The porch light was on. I turned the key. The house smelled like lemon oil and warm bread. I walked to the pegboard and ran my fingers along the tools. I opened the cedar chest and breathed in the smell of Tom's shirts. I sat on the back stoop with a cup of coffee and thought of the paper note Ashley had written the day she ushered me into Maple Grove. I unfolded its edges in my mind, and in a small, compassionate act that refused the script she'd given me, I took a Sharpie and wrote, "On my own. This is where I choose to belong," it read. Not a cage, but a threshold. Not because she said so, but because I still had a voice in the sentences of my own house. There is a civic part to this story that matters as much as the private one. The Ombudsman's office gave me a list of resources. Legal hotlines, elder abuse reporting numbers, state agencies that keep files of complaints and make sure patterns of financial exploitation don't go unnoticed. I gave them to friends and to people I met at church socials. And in the months after, I sat at a community table and listened to others tell stories of pressured moves, of relatives who had hidden keys, of businesses that had taken advantage of sudden losses. There is a network you can build when you unspool a problem and hand someone else a spool to hold. If you found yourself listening to this thinking, how can I help an older person I love? The steps are practical. Keep copies of financial documents and be present for important meetings. Ask for second opinions when a big decision is made. Know your county recorder's office and the title company names. Contact your state's long-term care ombudsman if you suspect restricted communication or wrongful admission. If anything feels rushed, ask for a pause and seek counsel. And if someone uses a power of attorney, remember that it carries fiduciary duties. It is not a blank check. I tell you this not as a legal lecture, but as a map I drew with my own feet. My house stayed mine because I insisted, because others believed me enough to help, and because the law, slow, procedural, sometimes maddening, had mechanisms for undoing things that wrongfully happened. The victory was messy. It required community, paper, courtrooms, and forgiveness that I could not rush into. It required Ashley to face herself and for me to keep my heart wide enough to let her try. And the light, my porch light, keeps burning. Sometimes Oliver brings his red dinosaur drawing and pins it near the door. Sometimes Lila waters the spider plant. Sometimes Ashley comes by with a pie and a look that is both sorry and hopeful. We do not pretend that the past is gone. We only refuse to let it be the dictator of the future. If this story moved you, if it hit some string that hums when you think about aging, family, and control, I want to hear from you. Share this video. Leave a like if you believe elders deserve agency, and tell me in the comments, have you or someone you love faced pressure like this? How did you respond? Could you forgive a family member who made a choice like Ashley did? Where do you draw the lines between protection and control? If you or someone you know is in immediate danger of financial exploitation or wrongful confinement, contact your local long-term care ombudsman, your county recorder's office, and an elder law attorney. These are the people who can help translate fear into action. Subscribe for more stories like this, real people, legal turns, and the small daily fights for dignity. If this story touched you, leave your question below. I'll answer the most pressing ones in the next video. And if you're in the US and not sure where to start, I'll pin a resource list with phone numbers to ombudsman lines and elder law hotlines. This is where I belong by choice and by stubbornness. If these words mean anything to you, light your porch light. Not to signal I've won, but to say I'm still here.